It's a pleasure to welcome you here at the AVERE offices, of course in the meeting room, and at our second event around STEAM, the campaign that we have launched in the beginning of September. Now, maybe a short word about the organization itself. We have, of course, a vision towards electrification of transport on all the aspects, and we don't think only about passenger cars, but also the aspect of fleets, trucks, buses, everything which is on the roads. We always had vision that we want to go pretty fast, because the end goal is 2050, of course, decarbonizing transport in line with the COP agreements. Making Europe a world leader in electromobility, yes, of course, we are representing also partially the European industry. Nevertheless, we see that e-mobility is not anymore in aspects of countries or Europe. It's a global challenge that we are facing, which is good as well. And we see electrification is happening not only concentrated primarily in China, it's now definitely happening in Europe, but also America is now addressing a very good closed agenda. AVERE is founded already in '78. In that time, the backlight of the first oil crisis. That was the basic idea from our founders. I would say today I have big mixed feelings, because we are still not in line or ahead of getting rid of our petrol feelings, if I can describe it like that. So we still have some work to do. We have been growing the last years. We are now more than 50 members. 22 of them are also associations. That term, they represent also industry. That's why we talk about indirect members. But we also have EV user organizations as a member, and we bring these voices together, and that makes a very interesting aspect. So our focus is indeed the EV user. How is their journey in charging? How is their journey in driving the vehicle? And this is not for me.
No, that's for me, but first a video.
First a video, of course, that's why. We will kick off this meeting with a video about the STEAM campaign, why we do it, and what is actually STEAM standing for, because we hope to trigger your attention on that, and the video will explain. Thank you.
Scene setter then. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Thomas Neumann. I'm policy manager at AVERE, lead our policy work on heavy-duty vehicles, and just I'm trying not to take too much time because we want to have time for a vibrant panel discussion later. But why are we talking about heavy-duty vehicles, and why do they matter so much? Well, basically, if we look at the EU's climate targets, then they are just a quite significant share of emissions, and we want to address this chunk and get to zero emissions in 2050, right? So road transport right now accounts for roughly a quarter of, or transport in general accounts for roughly a quarter of EU emissions. And of the total emissions for road transport, heavy-duty transport is actually a quarter of those. So it's quite a significant chunk. Overall, if you look at EU greenhouse gas emissions, it's about 6%, which is quite significant. It's 1 in 20, basically, emissions that contribute from heavy-duty transport. And if you look at how this has been developing in recent years, and this is from a recent briefing white paper study from the European Environment Agency, then you see that there is an increasing trend actually in emissions from heavy-duty road transport. That's basically because despite efficiency improvement on the individual truck level, trucks are less polluting over time. There's just more of them on the road. There's increasing demand for road transport. And so we have seen, with the exception of a light dip through the COVID pandemic in recent years, that these emissions have actually been on the rise. And therefore, and let's see what this is. And therefore, just very briefly plugging our policy asks for the upcoming heavy-duty CO2 standards, and we will then debate with all of you whether these are feasible asks, whether we need to go even quicker, whether this is maybe too ambitious. But we are calling as AVERE for the phase out of non-zero emission HGV sales by 2035 as the target year, coming from the background that vehicles that are sold today remain on the road often for 15 years, depending on which truck class exactly, but basically looking at the SCR statistics, vehicle in use, we're looking at an average of 15 years for new trucks, and therefore 2035 is when we should phase out to reach 2050. We want strong interim targets on the way to achieve scale in the market quickly. It's important to also extend the scope right now, covering heavy lorries mostly, but buses, coaches need to be included, also smaller trucks, so that all these vehicles are decarbonized. We want no loopholes for synthetic fuels, just because it complicates regulation and because these fuels are expensive to produce, scarce, rely on renewable energy for production, which is also scarce, and are more urgently needed for sectors just as aviation and shipping. And then lastly, besides these ambitious standards, we need flanking measures, and we'll later hear about AVERE. You've all seen that there has been a vote today in plenary confirming the ambitious trajectory that Rapporteur Ertug and his colleagues had proposed. But also the EPBD, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, truck depots, for example, logistics hubs, can contribute on the charging side. And it could also help, for example, to have a zero emissions procurement mandate for large fleet operators to basically guarantee to producers that there's demand also. So I'm not just looking at the supply side, but also regulating the demand side. But yeah, we'll discuss these and many other questions throughout the event today. And that brings me basically to the first speaker who can't be with us physically today. It's Felipe Rodriguez, who is Heavy Duty Vehicles Program Lead for the International Council of Clean Transportation, ICCT. And he's given us kindly a pre-recorded presentation that kind of sets the scene of all the regulatory instruments that are necessary to decarbonize heavy duty transport. And I hope we've got the sound working.
Try another video first.
I think we have to put out the mic. This was
Try the Steam video first.
yes.
Okay, second try of the Steam video. Let's see.
No.
Okay, let's change. Okay, let's. Right, so that's the mystery around STEAM also solved. Science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics. And now that we have got that, we can now jump to Mr. Yes.
Hi, my name is Felipe. I am the Heavy Duty Vehicles Program Lead at the ICCT. Thank you for the opportunity to present today in this important venue. It is unfortunate that I couldn't make it in person to Brussels, but I bring to you this pre-recorded presentation on the 5 key policies that are needed to decarbonize the heavy-duty vehicle sector in Europe. So allow me to share my screen and a short presentation on what these 5 policies are. To begin with, a few words on what the ICCT is. The ICCT is a non-profit research organization with the goal of decarbonizing transport across all modes. We work closely at the intersection between policy and technology, and we have as our mission and driving goal to limit the impact of transportation to climate change and to enable the a global warming that is well below 2 degrees Celsius, in the best case at 1.5 degrees Celsius. We have offices in several parts of the world, with an office in Berlin where I am based. So the Paris Agreement sets that target, right? So well below 2 degrees Celsius of global warming. And that creates a carbon budget that all different sectors of the economy need to comply with. So what we have done in this exercise is to analyze where we're heading for road transport in particular at the global level. In the diagram, you see on the y-axis the CO2 emissions well to wheel in millions of tons, right, in megatons. And on the x-axis, you have the time component. So what we see is that without further policy action, emissions are projected to increase out to 2050, to mid-century. And this is, of course, incompatible with the targets that we have set for decarbonizing the economy by mid-century. So when we look at the policies that are being considered and announced, not yet adopted or implemented, we see that there is some progress to offset this growth compared to 2020, but we're still not coming close to curbing the emissions. So this is where additional policies targeting light-duty and heavy-duty vehicles in all geographies come into play. And what we find is that an accelerated transition to zero-emission vehicles plays a significant role and can align the global economy on a pathway that is complying with that objective of well below 2 degrees Celsius. But the key message that I want you to keep from this figure is that heavy-duty vehicles can contribute at the same level as light-duty vehicles in this transition. Therefore, we need to put more emphasis on trucks and buses and the electrification of these heavy vehicles if we are to live in a future where climate and global warming is not a threat to humanity. So let me start with what is the situation in Europe today, up to 2021. You have here 3 different segments of vehicles. We have heavy trucks, medium trucks, and buses. For heavy trucks, we see that the transition is really in the early stages, registering somewhere between 200 and 250 units in the EU 27 countries. Keeping in mind that the heavy truck market is hundreds of thousands of units, right? So it is still less than 0.1% that we have. For medium trucks, it looks a bit more promising. You have here a lot of green color in the medium truck segment. And I will tell you why that is why Germany has had such a prominent role in the transition to medium electric trucks. And for buses, you see that the transition has happened or is happening at a more accelerated pace. Buses now represent over 10% of the new vehicle market, electric buses, that is, of the new vehicle bus market. And that shares continue to keep increasing. So if we look at what manufacturers are doing, we see that in the heavy truck segment, Volvo Group, Volvo Trucks has taken the early lead in commercializing many of these vehicles under both brands, right? Volvo Trucks and Renault Trucks. But the future remains uncertain about who is going to take the leadership here, as manufacturers have announced ambitious targets for 2030, 2035, and 2040. And we're going to get into those in a second. For medium trucks and buses, medium trucks is interesting because the market was single-handedly developed by one company called Street Scooter in cooperation with the Deutsche Post. And that was like an example of a market failure of established manufacturers taking an opportunity to commercialize electric trucks. And here Deutsche Post had to go and fund a startup, Street Scooter, to be able to get access to those vehicles that established manufacturers were not producing. And on buses, you see that we have a bit more diversity on the supply of electric buses, which is quite promising and enhances and increases competition. So now let me jump into the 5 key policies that we have. The first and perhaps one of the most important policies are phase-out targets. So phase-out targets are political decisions that are taken by a government setting the long-term goal for banning the combustion engine and phasing in completely electric powertrains. We have seen a lot of this happening in California, for example, something enshrined into regulation, not only setting a phase-out target, but also intermediate targets for the transition. I'm going to get to the point of intermediate targets and why they are so important. But at the global level, we see that the most important initiative that we have today is the Memorandum of Understanding, the global MOU that several countries have signed: Austria, Canada, Chile, Denmark, Finland, Luxembourg, Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Portugal, Scotland, Switzerland, Turkey, United Kingdom, Uruguay, and Wales. And they set a goal of achieving 30% market penetration for zero-emission trucks by 2030 and a full phase out of the combustion engine, complete transition to electric trucks by 2040. Now, these phase out targets set the long-term goal, as I mentioned, but they need to be enforced by other type of policies that have more teeth, basically. In the European Union, that policy is the CO2 standards for heavy-duty vehicles. The first round of CO2 standards was adopted back in 2018, 2019, and it sets a 15% CO2 reduction by 2025 and 30% CO2 reduction by 2030. This is averaged across the fleet and across all vehicle segments. This regulation, and this is what you can see there in that brown line at the top, was set on the technology potential of internal combustion engine technologies. That is, the regulation did not consider back then a significant role for electric trucks in decarbonizing the economy. But what happened after that is that manufacturers, realizing that this 30% target was coming, did react by announcing ambitious strategies to transition to electric trucks. And this is what you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. We have here, let's say, an area plot where you have the different manufacturers and the different commitments they have made to transition to 100% electric trucks, or a significant percentage in the coming years. Mercedes and Daimler Trucks in Europe is committed to a full transition by 2039. We have Scania committing to 100% by 2040, and we have MAN, Renault Trucks, and Volvo Trucks with important intermediate targets, such as a 50% transition by Volvo Trucks. Iveco, DAF, and other manufacturers have not made those commitments individually, but only in the form of an umbrella announcement under the ACEA, right, the lobby organization representing these companies, that sets a fossil-free target by 2040. Fossil-free is a vague language that still leaves the door open for combustion engine technologies, and that's why we do not consider it a serious commitment at this point. Now, if coming back to the left-hand side of the figure, the CO2 standards are now going to be reviewed by the end of the year or maybe early 2023. And what we have here is these 3 blue lines that set different ambition levels. Some of them align with the European climate law, with the European Green Deal. Some of them aren't. And what we wanted to understand is what level of stringency do we need to get close to the full decarbonization of transport by 2050. Understanding that the truck fleet takes a while to renew itself, we see that a 60% reduction in CO2 by 2030, 90% reduction by 2035, and a full phase out 100% reduction by 2040 is needed if Europe is to align with its climate commitments. But that's talking about the supply side of the equation. How do we make sure that manufacturers really deliver on their commitments, right? And this is the goal of CO2 standards, setting in stone those commitments and creating a stick, not only the carrots, but also the sticks for manufacturers to deliver. Now, what happens on the demand side? The demand side, there are important fiscal regulations that are being adopted in Europe. One of them is the Eurovignette directive that was revised recently, that sets two policy levers that could increase the attractiveness of operators to buy zero-emission vehicles. The first is a carrot. So the carrot that this Eurovignette directive provides, it's a road toll reduction for zero-emission vehicles. And this is in the form of up to 75%. And what we have done at the ICCT is to try to model the impact of that policy in zero-emission, in particular battery electric trucks, achieving cost parity, TCO parity with diesel trucks. And what we see is that the policy can bring forward that cost parity with diesel by roughly around 5 years, right? This is highly dependent on the cost of road tolls. But taking the case of Germany as the most important example, Germany currently has 100% exception of the road toll, and that policy can bring the TCO parity forward 5 years to something like 2024. Now, there's also a stick in the regulation that member states can implement, and this is a CO2 charge as part of the road toll, up to 16 cents per kilometer. And we see this also as an important policy that can bring TCO parity forward even to a greater extent, right? Taking again the case of Germany, we see that increasing the price of road tolls in 16 cents per kilometer for diesel vehicles makes those vehicles more expensive and brings the TCO parity between battery electric and diesel about 6 years. And then the third component of this equation to the transition is, of course, the infrastructure. The AVERE, the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation that is being discussed in Parliament and in Council soon, hopefully heading into trilogues, would set targets for member states to deploy that charging infrastructure. This is a summary of the Commission's proposal. On the other hand, you have a map of the TEN-T network. And what we have found is that the Commission proposal goes in the right direction, but not far enough to ensure that the right level of infrastructure is deployed. So this sets sort of the minimum level that would be needed, but it's a very important step, and it will definitely facilitate things for the transition. And last but not least, we need to talk about fleet procurement regulations. I think globally, the most important one happening right now is what is being done in California with the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation, still being discussed. But this regulation would set targets for private fleets to buy zero-emission trucks. In Europe, we are not that far. We're talking about only targets for public procurement under the Clean Vehicles Directive. And you can see here on the left of the slide the targets that are set for different member states on buses, right? So and that's why we see that bus transition is happening quicker. But there is a potential for the Commission to propose something as part of the Green Freight Package that will be released sometime in 2023, as they have announced as part of the Repower EU strategy, the possibility to setting purchase mandates for public and corporate fleets above a certain size, so large entities. So these are the 5 policies: phase-out targets, strong regulation, either CO2 requirements or CO2 performance regulations that have intermediate steps, fiscal regulations and incentives to drive demand, charging infrastructure regulations to ensure that the chargers and the hydrogen infrastructure is there, and last but not least, purchase requirements to align the supply of vehicles with the demand of them. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope that this summary of the 5 policies was insightful for you, and I look forward to meeting you all in person sometime soon.
Thanks again to our speaker, although he couldn't make it in person today, but I think good scene setter here, lining out the 5 key levers that we have to really accelerate this transition. And we'll stay for a little while now on the, let's say, policy and climate needs side, and hear from, I think, the transport NGO in Brussels. I think if we talk about green transport NGO and I ask you for any name, then you will all probably say transport and environment. And we have here today Sofie Defour, which is Clean Trucks Director at TNE. And Sofie, floor is yours. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Thomas, and thanks for the kind introduction.
If you want to come up, you can also.
Okay. But maybe here I'm from the screen.
Yeah.
You got to sit down because otherwise I have to bend over. I could go to the first slide, please.
If you want, yeah. No, it's just in front.
So as Thomas already outlined, and also Felipe, we have a heavy-duty climate problem in Europe. If we don't change the sales trajectory for trucks, then we will see a 44% growth in activity, which will go together with growth in emissions, and actually the pollution from trucks will undo all the emission savings from light-duty vehicles that we just fought so hard for. So Thomas already explained nicely why the focus is being set on 2035, also at transport and environment, because trucks stay on the road 15 to 18 years. So if we come back from 2050, which is the deadline to be net zero in Europe, then you land around 2035. So apart from the climate point of view, at TNE we wanted to look at is 2035 also feasible? So we commissioned a study from TNO, which is a Dutch consultancy, to look into when zero emission trucks would have lower total cost of ownership than diesel trucks, while performing the exact same operational requirements. So the same payload over the same time and delivering the same range. And so you can see here on the slides the results. And so what we see is that in 2035, 99.8% of freight trucks, and by freight trucks we mean small, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles, but not vocational vehicles, 99.8% would beat diesel in 2035. So if we look at what that could mean for 2030, then you see on these slides the different policy scenarios. So on the right-hand side, you see the minus 30% CO2 targets in 2030 that is in the current legislation. And this would deliver around 160,000 zero-emission trucks on the road in 2030. Now, we also looked at the truck makers' announcements, which is the column that you see in the middle. And so if you calculate all those announcements and add those up by the OEMs, you would come to a bit over 600,000 trucks on the road in 2030. Now, in our scenario, where we move towards 100% sales target for freight trucks in 2035, you would land at the light blue column in 2030, so a minus 65% target, which would bring you around 660,000 trucks on the road. So that's not that much more actually than the OEMs themselves have committed to. On the right-hand side, then you can see a more ambitious scenario where we already go to 100% in 2030. But I think there all we can say that would be extremely challenging. So that's why we're advocating for the light blue bar. Now, if we have these voluntary commitments, which are already close to what we as TNE are advocating for in 2030, and if we have this market uptake potential as looked into by TNO, which shows that in 2035, almost all zero-emission trucks beat diesel on costs, why do we then need regulation? Well, because the market uptake potential, what TNO has looked into, is not the same as what will happen in reality. I think a good example there is the urban delivery market, where you see in the TNO study that 70% of use cases, the battery electric truck would already today beat the diesel truck in terms of TCO. But we don't see that in the market. It's not like 70% of new trucks sold in the urban delivery segment are zero emission. And the reason why is that these trucks are not being produced yet at that scale. The OEMs are not delivering them yet. You hear from a lot of hauliers that they want to buy them, but they're not there. And obviously, we also still need to invest in the charging and so on. And we need to overcome some maybe conservatism in the sector to take the leap towards new technologies, but it clearly shows that you need regulations to ensure that the supply meets the market uptake potential. A second reason is that voluntary commitments, as was already outlined by the previous two speakers, doesn't mean that it will happen in reality. I think also in the car segment, that's something that we're seeing, that actually the market supply follows quite closely the regulatory requirements. That doesn't go too much beyond that. Third point is that we need to smoothen the transition. And this is why these intermediate targets are so important to us, because if we leave 2050 is a certainty. We need to go to net zero by then. So if we leave all of the efforts to the last decades, then we risk having a disruptive transition in the last decade, because this will require a lot of investments, training of workforce, rebuilding production plants. So we need to start that early enough, and we need to make sure that it's a gradual ramp-up plan. And then there's the global leadership aspect of it. We see in the US now with the Inflation Reduction Act that freight vehicles in the US could reach cost parity with diesel trucks already in the early 2020s. If we as Europe don't match that ambition, we risk losing our global leadership that we have today. And the same is true for supply chains. If we don't signal clearly now to the battery sector that we need this supply of batteries for Europe, that we will deliver this amount of production, then the supply will just not be there by the time that we need it. And again, we will follow behind on our ambition. So we really need to set that clear in the regulation. And so if you then look at what that means, you can see on the green line the techno-economic uptake potential that was identified in the study by TNO. So this is what is possible from just the supply side and when these trucks would reach TCO parity with diesel trucks. But obviously, this doesn't take into account that you need to build out a charging network, that you need to rebuild the production plants, that you need to school your workforce, and so on. So that's why we, as TNE, advocate for the blue line, and then the gray line at the bottom is the minimum required by the current policy, so the -15% and the -30%. So we have tried to find a sweet spot which still tries and meets our climate goals, and at the same time is realistic in terms of how fast we can ensure the transition delivers while trying to meet the techno-economic uptake potential that is there. And so the opportunity cost of not moving towards our recommendations, which are the same actually as the recommendation, would be that there will be 1.3 million more diesel trucks on the road in 2030 if we don't act now and if we don't change the sales trajectory. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sofie. And I think now we've kind of established what we need from a regulatory perspective, what kind of pathway we need to follow. And then the second question, apart from climate needs, is now the user needs. We've heard we are basically a TCO parity in many cases already. In other cases, we're rapidly approaching it. So what do users actually need? What do corporations, for example, that deploy heavy-duty vehicles need to actually go for zero-emission heavy-duty trucking? And I am very happy that we have here today Michael Lohmeier, which is Vice President for Clean Operations at Deutsche Post's DHL. And he'll tell us a bit about the perspective of users. So, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. At least of one user, right?
Well, I couldn't invite all. Would have been a bit crowded.
Yeah, sure. So I try to be as broad as possible. Yeah, thanks for the invitation and for the possibility to share our thoughts. I have only 2 slides with me, so try to explain them quickly. First of all, I think what I have not with me is, but I would like to share, is that we have a company target, which is 30% or more than 30% until 2030 in line hauling CO2 reduction. So so we communicated this already last year in March. So we did a lot of calculations, as you can imagine, but we also took into consideration, coming back to that, what I've heard before, what we need to reach or to comply to the Paris target. So we applied also for the Science-Based Target Initiative, and out of this Science-Based Target Initiative, broken down top down, we received, let's say, a target for the trucks, and that means that we need at least 30% sustainable fuel or whatever fuel CO2 reduction on the road with our big trucks. And we have, by the way, for the smaller ones, for the vans, a 60% electrification target on the last mile, which is not maybe the biggest discussion today, but also worth mentioning. When we discuss trucking and we discuss with all countries and we discuss with all continents at the moment, so there are also good situations at the moment, mentioning the Americas market, where we still have 9 cents per kilowatt hour. So when we talk about an electric vehicle or an electric truck, that's a positive business case, maybe not for the truck, but for the van, definitely as of today. But when we talk with countries and with country managers and communicate the plan and discuss how we can really realize the CO2 reduction with trucks, we mainly discuss 3 different items at the moment. It's first of all the vehicle. We will hear later on from Volvo how that works, but we also need to discuss the energy source, which is the second and also not less important thing. It needs to be green, it needs to be clean. And last but not least, and this is really the heart of the discussion at the moment, it's the infrastructure, be it for gas trucks that we have or that we operate, CNG, bio-CNG, bio-LNG, or also for more and more electric trucks that we operate in our fleet. So you need to understand that from an operator's perspective, operational perspective, it's the 3 different things that we have here, which is new for the driver, because the driver is normally used to a diesel truck. The driver has the refueling card, entering whatever refueling station he or she wants to enter. He's refueling the truck, doing this with his card, and that's it. But today they need to understand, what energy source do I have? Where does it come from? They need to understand, how does the infrastructure work like? Is it LNG? Is it minus 160 degrees? I need to wear gloves when I refuel the truck. Is it, let's say, a fast charging infrastructure that I need to recharge my electric truck, and so on. So it's very complicated and complex for a company like we are at the moment to place alternative vehicles for the left side reasons, vehicles, infrastructure, and energy. But on the right side, you see also the business requirements that are always on top. It's first of all, not always first of all, the operational cost or total cost of ownership, which is tricky for the truck at the moment. for the e-truck, but it's also the operational feasibility, which is always very, very important. So when I have a truck driving from A to B and driving normally 15 tons from A to B, and I then place an electric truck, which can only do 12 tons, I need a second one, which is not good for the business case and for the total cost of ownership. So at the moment, it's quite hard for us. We have at the moment 30 electric trucks running, heavy duty trucks running in the company until end of this year. So it's quite hard at the moment to find the driving cycle where we can place them, because they for sure do not fit one on a one-on-one comparison, or not one-on-one comparison comparable with a diesel vehicle. So number one and number two, operational feasibility and total cost of ownership is quite important. The second one, which is really influencing the total cost of ownership, as said, is the infrastructure. So it's always for us very, very important to understand upfront how the driving cycle of that respective truck looks like. Why that? We have cases where it is enough to charge an electric truck with an AC charger, because we have enough time overnight to do it. So there's no need to spend 80,000–90,000 euro for a DC charger when we don't need it. So this is also affecting the total cost of ownership. So it's more than that, only talking about the truck itself. It's more also to understand the operational profile, and then we find also a solution for the infrastructure. Environmental benefits not mentioned before with the energy source. So for sure, if there are no environmental benefits, we don't do it. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is briefly showing a bit cut on the right side, doesn't matter. It's somehow the vehicle strategy as we have it at the moment. You see the vehicle categories on the left side, the very small ones, for sure electric. You see the big ones, and this, let's say, frontier is moved in that direction over the last months, because we also have in that area with mileages around 200 kilometers at the moment, the possibility to use an electric truck, a full electric truck, which is good. But to be honest, especially in that big area, we have for sure driving cycles of up to 180–250,000 per year, which is simply not doable with a truck, electric truck like we have today with the range profile it has. So there's a lot of things to do. Happy to hear later more about that from Volvo. But I think this is that's the direction it goes at the moment. But nevertheless, I mean, the good story is that this driving profile and this kind of vehicles are still or are already in our fleet, which have not been before over the last months and years. So when we did the strategy, there was not part of the strategy. We mainly focused on the small ones. Mentioning also the medium-sized vehicles. So there is no electric vehicle at the moment in place for us from an operator's perspective. Not fully understandable, because these were the ones we could easily drive. They drive 100 to 120, maybe 80 kilometers a day. So to find the driving cycle inside our company out of the some thousand trucks that we have in that area is much more easier than doing this in that area. So yeah, I would also like to push this thought to also come up here in the regional traffics, like we call it, with an electric solution. On the right side, you see then electric gases liquid, but also on the right side, you see somehow the way forward for us. You see on the left side, which is always worth mentioning, the low emission part is also interesting and important for us for various reasons. First of all, as I said, we have the 2030 reduction target. We don't need this if we wait for the electric truck when it can operate it. So we need solutions in between, which are at the moment bio-LNG, bio-CNG, and where possible and where drivable, HVO. And then in the next step, zero emission, we have the battery electric truck then in place, but we really count on the low emission pathway to zero emissions until 2030 as well, which is really important from our side to follow this as well. So that would be quickly the operator's view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I guess I don't need to say that much to set up the next presentation, because I think the challenge has been set. We've heard about the climate needs, we've heard about the user needs, and well, basically you've just been directly challenged in terms of, you know, delivering structures suited to more use cases. So Mr. Anders Berger is Director Public Affairs at Volvo Group, and really looking forward to
Thank you.
hearing your response.
Here comes the hostage. Please bring up my slides. Delighted to be here. Thanks a lot for inviting me. It's a really important topic that we're discussing. And policy, as you will see from my presentation, plays a vital role in the transition from what we have today and all the way to meet the Paris Agreement. I work out of Gothenburg, the head office of Volvo Group. I will, for this presentation, talk about the truck side of Volvo Group, which is in European context, Volvo trucks and Renault trucks. We have other business areas, but they will be presented in other presentations. So this is our story. This is our strategy, our roadmap towards meeting what is important to us. And that is meeting the Paris Agreement, net zero by 2050. It's not zero emission per se. Zero emission is the most important tool in that journey, but it's not the only tool. We cannot disqualify other means of getting there and using whatever we have that qualifies as net zero. So that's important. But as you see, the new dominant design for trucks will be electric. There's no question about it. The whole industry is geared to it. I hope some of you had the opportunity to be at IAA in Hanover a couple of weeks ago. It was all electric, either battery or 80% battery electric, 15% fuel cell electric, and 5% low emission fuels, you could say. But it was extremely evident. So the electric driveline is what it's going to replace the diesel engine to a large extent, and it's going to be a mix of battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles. But as we see the future, we see that there will be a need if we're going to serve all trucks in Europe, all transport. We will have a need. We don't know how big it is. We don't know the split between battery and fuel cell. It can be debated. It will vary, most definitely, between different regions and different applications. But we see that there are transport applications that are extremely difficult to solve with either battery or fuel cell electric vehicles. So we believe that bio-LNG, e-fuels of some sort, if we can generate enough cheap green electricity, green hydrogen, as in combustion engine, can be the sort of residual that we need to keep in order to make net zero in the rolling fleet by 2050. So we need to sell fossil-free vehicles by 2040, then we have 10 years to replace the fleet, which is, you mentioned 15, 17. In actual terms, if you look at where the transport work is done, it's done by vehicles with less age than 10 years. So we have a tail of old vehicles, but they don't really, not that important. This is the other part of that story. This is explaining why, because we see that the demand in terms of energy usage, in terms of yearly, but I would say also daily mileage, because daily mileage is also very important when it comes to how we're going to solve the transport, the operations of that Michael just described. It's the daily mileage. Annual mileage is actually good for most technologies, because the more miles you drive, the more you can pay off the higher investment costs. So one challenge with distribution trucks in cities is the low mileage, annual mileage. The challenge with many vehicles is the variance in daily mileage. And we need, for some really heavy, in parts of Europe where we will have extremely high costs of building charging infrastructure or fuel cell infrastructure, we see again that there will be a room for net zero carbon-free fuels in a combustion engine. And I'll just take you through the sort of journey that we are now. It's been stated that we are the market leader, and that's correct. I can confirm. We have sold some 3,000 Volvo trucks and 1,000 Renault trucks now. Heavy-duty battery electrics. We are in series production. I'll come to that. And we are learning together with the customer, because this is not replacing trucks. This is changing an entire transport system. And the challenge is exponential compared to going from Euro 6 to Euro post Euro 6 or Euro 5 to Euro 6 when it's only a truck issue. This is transitioning an entire transport system. So we're learning. This is, I think, globally, I would say the biggest project where we are following together with Scania vehicles and AVERE vehicles and Volvo vehicles, we're following 60 different flows. And as to your, I see, hope you recognize the vehicle up here, Michael.
I know that, but
You know that vehicle, of course, yes.
perfect.
Yeah. So it's a 64-ton combination in line schedule between Jönköping and Gothenburg, doing distribution rounds during the day and then line scheduling through the night. So we're learning together with customers, because this is so much than just replacing the vehicle. It's understanding all the operational features of logistics. It's understanding what is an adequate charging strategy for this particular route, and how can we solve the charging needs. So we're doing it together with academia, together with the Swedish authorities, together with all the logistic partners, with the energy guys. The entire new ecosystem is part of this 3-year big pilot project. And we have already learned that initially there is a need for public co-funding for trucks. The capex is still too high. There is a need for initial co-funding of infrastructure, both the public one that AVERE will regulate, but also for the private one at depots, at home depots, and for destinations where trucks can use when they are loading and unloading. We see that the transport buyers need to step up. They need to provide longer contracts. And our feedback is 5 years is sort of a minimum time to make this transition happen. And we see, of course, that this can be helped by zero emission zone, off-peak deliveries, etc., making the TCO for the electric truck better. And of course, again, when it comes to policy, we always argue for predictability and long-term view. But it is a challenge. We should not face. TCO is a challenge in the start here. And policy is vital. And we have, in this case, we have state aid groups like AVERE to help us with co-funding. We have Eurovignette, we have other policy instruments. We see the kind of challenges we face with driving and resting time regulation. So there's a policy landscape nudging this towards market uptake, but we are not actually there yet. Same goes for charging. This will be a challenge. We can do it, but this is just to reflect that we need to charge the truck when it's standing still anyway, because otherwise we will lose too much productivity. And this is a map over France. I have Sweden there, but I'm close to France today. This is the opportunity charging need for an electric French fleet of 20%. So 80% are still not electric, 80% are electric, heavy duty vehicles. And this tells us actually two things. We need quite a geographical coverage, even for a small part of the energy, because the first 20% of trucks will actually charge mostly during night, because they are standing still quite a lot. So they will use low power night charging to fill up, start fully charged, and then they need additional charging during the day to make their daily mileage. And we see with only 20% in France, that equates roughly 100,000 trucks. We need to cover large part of France with additional high power, relatively high power charging. The other thing that sticks out here is the importance of the big cities. Paris, Lyon, I'm not so good at French, Bordeaux, I guess, Côte d'Azur. Cities will be the main charging hubs even for the long haul traffic. So cities will have a power challenge. Trucks, or I mean, the general challenge for opportunity charging is to have the coverage and using it quite early, 10 to 30% of the energy. Still high power, but little energy, which drives the cost for charging infrastructure. And then we have the sort of deployment and energy challenges, grid capacity, connection lead times, etc., and cost. It's going to be a challenge to bring this down, and we need support here. We have, as OEMs, have taken our piece of the puzzle here, trying to pitch in with this joint venture we have together with Daimler and Volta to accelerate and capitalize the deployment. But we see, of course, that there are business model challenges in these early stages of transition. We can, due to this fact, we're going to have a low utilization of the infrastructure we build, the public infrastructure we build. So we will perhaps arrive at high prices per kilowatt hour to cover the cost, or lower availability to drive up the utilization. So again, policy is vital, and of course the Commission and AVERE and the Council and Parliament will be absolutely crucial here in setting a direction for the infrastructure built in Europe. Last slide, and sort of the main argument for why we don't approve to a 2035 100% or IC ban, which is actually what Sofie was stating. We believe that if we were to serve all heavy-duty trucks, there will still be need for sustainable biofuels, and for some time. I would be happy if the TNO report applied to all trucks in Europe, but it doesn't, unfortunately. It applies to 70% of the trucks in Europe. The 2x4 tractors. 30% of the trucks in Europe are not accounted for in the TNO report. Vocational trucks, as you see, this is the most common European construction truck. You could try to fit this truck with 400 kilowatt of batteries. It's a challenge, to say the least. This is, by the way, the first series produced Volvo FH 44-ton from Tullius 4 weeks ago. So and taking our own goals, I mean, Volvo Trucks state that 70% of truck sales will be electric by 2030. And taking 99% out of 72% is fairly close to 70%. So I think we are fairly in line, actually, if we moderate sort of the TNO results down to reality. And then for us, as again, it's net zero that is the challenge, not zero emission, because zero emission can be extremely costly if we drive it too far and do not utilize the other options we have in order to reach net zero. And just to finish off, again, I mean, this is to policymakers. The policy landscape around nudging this market uptake is so wide and complex. So our suggestion would be to take it a little step by step and have recurrent revisions instead, because we have Eurovignette, we have Gebel, we have AVERE, we have RED 2 and 3, we have, I mean, the policy landscape around this will need synchronization and coordination, and we need to instead set realistic targets in pace with the market and then revise as we go and know and understand how the actual market develops. So I think that would be my final recommendation to the policy side. Thank you.
Thanks, Anders. Very insightful, and happy to hear that we are at least on the principle aligned, and then we can, maybe have a better debate about what exactly that means for technologies, etc.
It's not the ends, it's the means.
Exactly. Now we have another OEM actually in the room that might be a bit less obscure to some of you, although it's making a name for itself. Because we have obviously the let's say legacy or transitioning OEMs that all of you know. You see trucks on the road every day, such as Volvo Trucks. But we also have new players that come to markets and that are actually in some ways fundamentally rethinking what electric trucks can look like compared to the trucks that you now see nowadays. And we thought it would be good to hear from a disruptive player that's coming new to the market and wants to take it by storm. And we have with us Carla Detrieux, which is Director of Business Developments for Volta Trucks. So Carla, the floor is yours. Thanks for being with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me at the back? Does that work? Excellent. So thank you very much to AVERE. Sorry for the French way of saying it, but very delighted to be here. I represent the OEM world, as Thomas said, from the startup / scale-up perspective, and very much support also some of the recommendations I heard from the Volvo group, which we 100% support. I think the big picture for us is ultimate electrification, decarbonization. So we all need to stay close and action. Basically, we can't talk necessarily about competitiveness right now in the market, since there's not enough supply to supply the whole demand. So it's about bringing as many solutions that are viable to the market and creating a marketplace. So a few words about Volta before I kick off our presentation. So I'm part of the founding team. I joined Volta in May 2020. The 2 co-founders, I'm essentially the 3rd employee, and 2.5 years later, we're more than 600. We have basically market traction all across Europe, our manufacturing in Austria. And I can say it's a crazy adventure to be in such a, at principle, conservative market, but now completely transitioning to new alternatives and supporting what I heard on IAA. The signal is all OEMs are bringing electric vehicles. So again, it's very positive. So first, why do we do this? So we heard all about environmental challenges and opportunities. I think a few points to add around the social and societal challenges that we also are tackling. And I think operators such as the Dutch group, the DHL, are experiencing it. It's around driver shortage, lack of attractiveness in the industry, lack of safety in urban environments, and to really position where we are actioning. We are talking about last mid-mile, mid-duty, really concentrated on urban distribution. So this is the why. And the how is with our Volta Zero product range. So going back a little bit where we started, the company was founded in 2019, and with around €1 million, we created what we called the Volta Zero, so the first purpose-built electric vehicle 16-ton on the market. With this prototype, we went all across Europe, met plenty of operators and regulation makers, and we started really gathering lots of interest from the market. This is what has helped us raising around 300 million euros with mainly Scandinavian and American funds. We currently are now in what we call the Bridge series, which is basically to secure all of the supply chain ahead of full-scale production. We'll be raising another 400 million before IPO in 2024. So a few of the milestones, and I think this is really the tipping point for all startups. There's plenty out there that have awesome ideas, but when you get into industrialization, this is where it starts getting difficult or complex, right? So the idea with Volta since the beginning has been sourcing components and technologies from established industry players that have production scale, and using or leveraging existing infrastructure for the manufacturing. So we selected Steyr Automotive, which is the ex-MAN trucks and buses plant in Austria. And with that, we can guarantee, so all this stuff, but we can guarantee a full-scale production by 2023 next year. So cumulative volume will be 3,000 trucks with a blend of 16 and 18 ton. And then in 2024, we'll build around 11,000 trucks, and we'll be spreading our wings across Europe and the US. And then you can't necessarily see there, but we'll be also introducing the 7.5 and 12 ton, which are again a must-have, I think, in urban distribution and parcel deliveries. Where we are now, I put this photo here, which was a very emotional moment for me. The first time that the Volta Zero was on public roads. and that was in Paris last month. So we have 25 prototypes that we call DV, so design verifications. These 25 vehicles are rolling across Europe for 3 to 4 months for internal testing, and we'll be collecting all the default systems and improving the next series, which are necessarily pilots, so full operations for commercial use. One example of a thought leader in this transition is Detrieux. So Detrieux is one of our key customers that has pre-ordered around 1,500 vehicles. And I think the thought leader piece is that it's not only looking at scope 1 emissions and thinking about on fleet, but it's also supporting all of the subcontractors that don't know where to start, I think, and acting on their behalf and pre-negotiating T's and C's and supporting budget. This is where I sound friendly and a bit arrogant at the same time. So as I said, we're supporting all solutions coming to market, although when it comes to the design, the purpose-built piece, we are the only ones on the market really bringing a solution that is designed for electric from scratch. What we mean by that is that we have started again from a blank piece of paper, electrical axle at the back, at the rear of the vehicle, condensing the motor on the rear axle, lots of space in the chassis to completely protect the batteries. So Meritor, Proterra, some of our established suppliers. Then you can't necessarily see, I think, with the luminosity, but the key star for us is around the cabin. Okay, so we didn't have any gearbox or combustion engine at the front. The result is a lowered cabin, positioned in the center of the vehicle. So obviously we make savings on production lines, but this isn't the point. The point is drivers don't have to step in and out into traffic lanes for cycling lanes anymore. To illustrate this problematic, there's a study in London that says that 4% of the traffic, 4% are trucks, but they are responsible for 78% of fatal accidents with cyclists and 26% with pedestrians. So again, major problematic that we think we're addressing, adding cameras, sensors, really thinking about how can we increase safety in urban environments. To add to this, being able to create eye contact with drivers, we're sitting with an SUV height, which is 1.8 meters from the ground, and plenty of other USPs. So this is the 16-ton. Again, there's 3 additional models that will be coming into the range, but we start very small. Okay, so it's one use case, urban distribution, and then a very thin selection of boxes, which is probably one of the key selling point, I think, for operators. Everything almost happens here. So it will be ambient, refrigerated. We also have what we call the brewery versions for the Carlsberg and Coca-Cola to deliver hotels, restaurants, cafes, and some EV OEMs also that are thinking about delivering EVs to their customers in a combustion engine dirty vehicle. That doesn't really make sense. So having this vehicle to deliver cars to customers. Just a bit of a point of view from the inside of the cabin. Okay. One point that I mentioned, that I didn't mention, that is also something that we battle for, is to attract more women to the industry. Okay, so 2% of drivers are females, and I think operators are definitely suffering from that, added to an average age of 55 years old, roughly, in Europe. To finish, and this is how we support mainly subcontractors, SMEs, to kick off this transition. You cannot necessarily think that, to support Volvo's point, you cannot think about delivering a vehicle and that's it. It's a whole ecosystem that changes. And so the idea is to provide the vehicle and the whole ecosystem that gravitates around this on a white label solution. So we are the aggregator, I'd say, of plenty of partners. So we announced last week Siemens as our charging infrastructure provider. But the idea is that we manage the project from understanding what the needs of customers are. And going back to what you were saying, sometimes we think I need fast chargers when actually the need is depot charging by night, so it doesn't require this big pool of energy. We do all of the civil engineering, installation, maintenance, and provide again the full suite of services from insurance, drivers training, which I heard is a key pain point, maintenance and service with what we call the third-party service agreements with companies such as TAPs, Bosch, ZF, financing, insurance, and of course, charging infrastructure. So we think this is the how, right? How this is going to happen. I think I'm over time, as always.
Oh, it's fine.
Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you very much.
So before we move into a very brief panel debate and hopefully also Q&A, opening the floor a bit. Last week of the day, we've talked a lot about where do we need to go, what do users need, what is coming to markets in terms of vehicles, but we haven't talked yet so much about enabling conditions. So it's been mentioned by all, it's very important that we have enabling conditions in place, but we haven't yet heard a presentation about it. And one enabling condition that was named repeatedly was infrastructure. We've seen the AVERE vote in Parliament, and now we're moving into trilogues. And so we're very happy that we have with us today Mr. Tullius, who is policy officer at DG Move, one of the great minds behind this proposal. And he will tell us a bit about what the Commission is envisaging to facilitate the switch to zero-emission trucks on the infrastructure side.
Oh, thank you. I only stepped in really in the last second because AVERE actually wanted to have DG Klima here, probably to tell you all about the upcoming CO2 standards and maybe get a little bit of inside information, especially in between afterwards. I can absolutely confirm you, I have no clue what we're going to propose. So I work for DG Move, I can tell you about infrastructure, but really not about the upcoming CO2 standards. Well, I think you are aware of AVERE, and it was mentioned here a lot. If we actually want to move to zero-emission trucks, to zero-emission heavy-duty vehicles, we need the infrastructure in place. We need it in place in the depots, of course, but we also need it in place on the main highways. We need it in place in urban nodes, and this is why we proposed in AVERE mandatory deployment targets. I think Mr. Rodriguez mentioned, yeah, that's all great that you actually proposed it, but it's not sufficient. We will actually need more. And he's right, of course. What we proposed are targets along the 10T corridors, and that would actually amount to a mandate of around 6,000 recharging points by 2025, assuming each recharging point at 350 kilowatt, and 20,000 by 2030. I hear from industry now that they probably expect they need 35,000 by 2030. Not sure about the kilowatt that they are thinking about. So it's significantly lower, but it's also not our aim at European level to actually plan all the infrastructure. It's basically what we want to achieve with the targets for heavy-duty vehicles, as we do for light-duty vehicles. We want to have a sufficient infrastructure. We want to ensure that any haulier would actually be able to buy an electric truck and basically find sufficient recharging infrastructure wherever we would like to go. And on that basis, markets need to take up. So we basically proposed recharging pools by 2030 of 3.5 megawatts. That's actually quite a lot if you think about it, as a minimum. But there will be more. In the Netherlands, we will see recharging pools by 2030, which will be greater. But that will come automatically with the additional demand. But talking about automatically is maybe a little bit simplistic, because it's not just about putting a recharging point somewhere and everybody is happy, especially when we talk about heavy-duty vehicles. We are talking here about a very, very close cooperation with the electricity grid. This goes already for depots. I think we shouldn't underestimate also the recharging needs in larger depots. You already see that today for public transport companies. If you actually modify your transport fleet, public transport fleet, and you actually replace all the buses in a bus depot with electric buses, you will also need to connect to at least to the medium voltage net and to medium voltage grid. So there are enormous investments here.
needed, particularly for public transport, but I see the same also for certain depots, private depots at least, that requires very, very close cooperation also then with the DSOs on a local level to actually provide the necessary power. That is even more important than when we are actually talking about infrastructure along the highways, where we need enormous amount of power, again, at least to the medium voltage grid. And we have to ensure, and I'm now saying just we have to, I don't know really how to address that, but I think we run into an extreme challenge here to actually ensure the very, very close cooperation here between the developers and the DSOs, possibly the TSOs, to ensure that we can actually meet the targets, which are actually in 8 years' time. So, and that's an extremely short time frame when we're actually not just thinking about putting a few chargers here and there, but with all the underlying infrastructure. So this is a little bit of an issue that I see needs more attention than just what we can do in AVERE. On AVERE itself, you might have heard the plenary voted today, so we now have a parliament position also on AVERE. They propose slightly higher targets than us for the recharging pools. Of course, then putting additional stress here on the electricity network and the needs for investments. And you might know that basically the council has been supportive of our targets for 2030. Almost a bit more flexibility, but basically has been supportive of the targets we set for 2030, but they actually have a little bit of a smoother ramp up, basically postponed, already having targets for 2025, but having the commission targets for 25 move to 2027. So there's a little bit of a smoother approach here for the build up. We will see how the co-legislators tackle those issues in the co-decision process. But I think there is a certain common ground on the principle, not yet on the numbers, but I think, and I hope we'll get there pretty soon once the trialogues start next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have now, let me see, around 40 minutes to left for a brief panel debate and Q&A. We'll keep the panel debate really to 1 or 2 questions, and then I hope that we can still take some questions from the room to keep it nice and interactive. So I would ask the panelists to come briefly to it.
Let them sit where they
Or we could do that. Okay. In that case, I wouldn't ask the panelists to come to the front. The panelists can stay in their places. And we'll do an initial round of questions as we are. So maybe a question to all panelists. We've heard a bit about different technologies that should be part of the transition. We've heard arguments for fuels, for example, to be involved, e-fuels, biofuels, low carbon fuels. So, well, maybe a bit of a two-pronged question. On the one hand, what do you think, and we've also heard about that, is the appropriate pace for the transition? When are we looking at no fossil fuels in transport? And after fossil fuels in transport, which technologies should still remain? And I think maybe let's start with TNE. So, Sofie, if you want to.
Excellent. So from our point of view, we really see only zero emission technologies. We don't want low emission technologies. And I think it also makes more sense if you look at the TCO. So in the different studies, you can see that e-fuels are actually going to be a lot more expensive, and in a sector where TCO is really the most important decision point. We don't think that makes sense from a cost point of view. And then, of course, you have the availability, which is both the case for biofuels and for e-fuels, where we think it should be prioritized for other sectors, and we should set market clarity on that as soon as possible to ensure that we don't have stranded assets, and that these can be scaled up for the sectors like aviation, maritime, heavy industry, where there are no sufficient alternative solutions. So for road transport with battery electric and with fuel cell hydrogen, we can cover the full markets. And then what the split would be between fuel cell hydrogen and between battery electric. That's the market will decide there. We see in our study that battery electric is for most use cases the most financially interesting, but there can be other reasons also to go for fuel cell hydrogen. So there we don't think there should be additional guidance. We do think when you look at charging infrastructure that we should also develop it at the same speed as OEMs are announcing their models. So most of them are first announcing long-haul models battery electric, and then only later in the 2020s the hydrogen. So we should make sure that we have the charging infrastructure for those battery electric trucks coming in 2024, 2025 as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any other panelists who want to directly react to that in terms of, do you see that other technologies will be cost competitive or need maybe for certain use cases?
Yeah, as I stated there, I mean, for a large part of the market, we agree that the battery electric vehicles will probably be most TCO competitive. But I guess again, I think that the end game for us is not zero emission, it's net zero. So I have a hard time understanding why we should disqualify manure-based bio-LNG, which is as a positive today, I mean, and years to come, over Polish or even German electricity, which has a carbon intensity in Poland of 700 grams per kilowatt hour. So I think, you know, we need to balance this with respect to the overall goal, which is net zero, and then not put extra cost on and particularly on one actor. I think that's the zero emission requirement is singling out one actor in the system, but as I alluded to, this is a system transformation, and without the infrastructure, without the other policy areas change in a way that will nudge the entire market, the sort of very, very positive scenario sketched up in the TMO report will not come true. And that's why it's difficult to take that as a single point of evidence to decide policy all the way up to 2035. Because we will need the e-fuels until the other sectors like shipping and aviation and industry are prepared to pay the price that not the e-fuels, but biofuels are. I agree with you that e-fuels is a shaky business. It depends on the renewable electricity in Europe. Oh, totally. I mean, that's the only thing, which is the case for hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles also. It's going to be the price of the hydrogen at the pump that will decide whether it can compete with battery electric trucks and some other factors having to do with the application and the driving patterns and the ability to build the infrastructure. But I think it's important to keep in mind that 70% of the trucks in Europe are not 100% of the trucks in Europe, and there are many applications in parts of Europe that will not be able to turn into either battery or fuel cell electric vehicles. And we know that because we track our vehicles. We have the data. We know how their daily mileage. We know the variance in mileage. We know where they drive. That's the map I showed. So I mean, we have facts. We don't do desktop studies on this based on what other researchers are saying on daily mileage. We take our own data, and we have. For that reason, we have 600,000 trucks connected in Europe, and of which we used 100,000 trucks to really understand the reality. And I think I would like to bring that into the sort of policy level discussion.
Thank you. I see that Sofie, you urgently want to react. Yeah, go ahead.
There is two very, very short points on the net zero. I do think, because I hear this in all the sectors, they all say, yeah, but you know, we can go to 90%, and then the other 10% we will do low emission, because the goal is net zero. And that's true, but if you look at how many forests we have, how much CCS we will be able to do by 2050, I don't think it's realistic for every sector to say we need part of that. And I think for road transport, there are very good solutions, and there are other sectors who will need this net zero capacity. And then just on the scope of the TNO study, so indeed we did not look at vocational vehicles, but these make up only 11% of sales. We did look at a construction truck, which is a small part of that 11%, but so it's not 70% of the market, but 90% of the market.
Thank you, and I would now propose we move on. It's a very interesting debate, and I would love to watch it longer with a bit of popcorn. We have seen, a lot of these, and we'll see a lot of these in the coming months. But maybe let's move a bit now into the enabling conditions, and I'd like to come to you, Michael. Looking at the operator's perspective, you are very ambitious in terms of decarbonizing your fleet. What are, let's say, the main obstacles that you're still facing that prevent you from going even quicker? So.
Even quicker is a good question. Yeah, I think it depends on the time scale we are talking about. At the moment, we focus clearly 2030 as a target. So that means that we also need to have solutions as of now, because when we purchase a truck or a van, we run vans 12 years in the company. So when we want to change something before 2035, we need to react now. So we need to have solutions which are now marketable. This is the reason why we also go for low emission solutions, by the way. But what is the main obstacle is really the TCO at the moment, to be very clear. And I don't want to say that it's all about money at the end of the day, it's all about risk. So we have 80% of our emissions coming from subcontractors. So this is the normal way also for TNT, for UPS, for all these other guys. So it's a second discussion that we need to have. Not only how to deal with the technology, it's also how to deal with the subcontractor, convincing the subcontractor taking care about the 80% of the emissions of the company, that they also need to have the Volvo truck or anything else. So it's a separate discussion, as said. But that brings me back to the point of TCO, and the TCO at the moment, as said, in many countries, is on a good way for electric vehicles to do it, but at the end it costs more. And when we then talk to our customers, and who are also customers here from Deutsche Post DHL, so we have the same situation as any other company, there is first customers' willingness to spend more for the logistics services, because the logistics services will increase from a price perspective, and some are not. So this is also a discussion that needs to be started at the end of the day. And we are in that discussion. It looks good. It looks far better than 1 year or 2 years ago. But this is also, let's say, in the move. So it's a twofold thing to answer your question. It's to have the solution in place already as of now, but also to have the customers who are willing to spend more for that.
Thank you. Actually, it brings me to a question, maybe to all panelists. It was not one of those that I sent you in preparation. We're talking about the TCO gap and how to bring this down. Would you be in favor of demand side measures next to supply side measures? So we have the truck CO2 standards, but what do you think can be done to prompt operators to switch to electric in terms of vignettes, carbon pricing, maybe even purchase mandates? If any of you want to take this, go ahead. Sure.
So to this question, maybe I take the example of Paris, which is, I think, the biggest playing ground for Volta as of today. Why? Because this is the most aggressive diesel ban out there. So we talk about 2024, thousands of trucks, cars passed from that. So I think it's regulating. I heard about the carrot incentivizing as well. What we can see now is that France is very much supporting the transition of the asset itself, but also looking at the charging infrastructure, which is so variable, and for sometimes the exact same layout or hardware. I have the use case of an operator having 2 different quotes for 1 and 7 million, and we're talking about the exact euros, sorry, and we're talking about the exact same layout. So for operators, this can be major. I heard about the contractors. We're talking about a market that's under so much pressure and such tight margins, especially now, that it's on both sides regulations. And another one that comes to mind is in London, we're talking about low emission zones, congestion charge, and on the other side again, incentives. And I think going back to what I heard, sometimes it's going to be difficult to value the delta, right, between what we call ICE and electric. But these guys at the top of the food chain, your customers, are also the ones that are putting these big flags, saying this is what we want to do, but then they need to give themselves the tools and the tech action to reach their mission. So I know it's a difficult conversation to have, but I can only see it going in the right direction. It's a negligible step. Answers part of the question.
Yeah, definitely. So a bit of a, let's say, carrot and stick approach of incentives and regulation. Thank you very much.
May I comment?
Yes.
I think it is extremely difficult to mandate demand if you're thinking of those sort of policy level mandates in line with on the state level, like the Clean Legal Directive for public procurement. I think we should rather work with those kind of slightly higher level mandates or targets for on, and particularly using public procurement also for trucks. I mean, that is all the construction work going on in Europe that is publicly procured could be a way to initialize the market for more electric construction vehicles. They often also move in or close to cities, which have the additional benefit of no emissions and silence, etc. So I think using the public procurement instrument could be a really good way of incentivizing and stimulating the market. But I wouldn't say that a mandate on general logistic operators and haulers up to Europe to have a certain quota of zero emission trucks that would be a difficult and dangerous way to go, I think. Even though it would help us, I'd be happy, but I don't think it's the right way to go. I think we, as a society, will bring more costs, so it will not be climate efficient. So.
Okay, very clear. Thank you. I would like to move to maybe an enabler that, again, we've just heard about because it's just so current. We've had the AVERE votes today in plenary. And I'd like to hear from you basically, well, your views on where we are now before the trilogues, Parliament going much more ambitious, especially on heavy duty charging target, Council, especially up to 2030 being a bit more, let's say, conservative. So on the one hand, is the Parliament approach feasible? On the other hand, is the Council approach sufficient, or is it too little? And maybe there I would start with Kai from the Commission view, because you set the targets, I guess, based on your impact assessments initially. So.
Yes, of course, I have to defend our proposal, which also is based on the impact assessment. But I think what was important for us was that we have a basic infrastructure already in 2025. I think that target year was extremely important to maintain. Also seeing that now the first long distance trucks will come into the markets into the coming years, and we simply cannot afford waiting until 2030 until actually we do have a European infrastructure. So basically, this maintaining of the 2025 target was the most crucial aspect, I think, and that is also maintained in the Council. I think as fast as we can go, the better it is, obviously. But you have to see how feasible that is. And I come back to the electricity grid infrastructure in the Council. The main argument has always been we cannot, as a member state, guarantee the construction of battery charging pools along all the TEN-T networks because we don't have even the information readily available on the feasibility of the connection to the electricity grid. So there is certainly a lot of work to be done by the member states also now to basically ensure that this targets can actually be put in operation. But as I said, I think what is really crucial is to have the date in the 2025 date
to have a minimum infrastructure. Right?
Thank you, very clear. So timeline is the most important point. Any other panelists with strong views on AVERE?
I have very strong views. I've voiced them to the commission several times, and I think I look forward to a good compromise, because I think if you take the three positions together, we have something really good. And this, as we heard from the commission, I think the 2025 timeline is extremely important, because we don't have time to wait, and we can lose every day we lose now. We will be with us for years to come. So keeping the time is absolutely crucial. I think we should aim for the power and density level set out by the parliament. I think it's getting closer. And then I think we should take something from the council also, because the big point of the commission's proposal, if I may say, was that it was a sort of a Brussels ruler of 60 kilometers laid out over Europe, regardless of the traffic intensity. And that risk was a risk to build stranded assets in the original proposal. So taking the flexibility measures, keeping the ambition level based on the TEN-T network at member state level, but adding flexibility so member state can build the infrastructure where it's needed. It's quite a difference to build outside Duisburg in Germany, where we have 22,000 heavy-duty trucks over 24 hours in average, and building in northern Sweden or Finland or other outskirts of Europe, where we have 300 to 500 trucks every day on the TEN-T network. So adding flexibility, keeping the timeline, and keeping the parliament ambition on power and density at the member state level. So the number of charging stations.
Okay, I saw you want to defend yourself against the accusations of being the one-size-fits-all ruler that imposes disproportionate requirements on autonomous regions. So go ahead.
No, I think it's correct to say that. I mean, we see both in council and parliament the requests for some certain flexibility, and I think we can all agree that maybe 3.5 megawatt charging in Lapland in northern Sweden every 60 kilometers is not always needed when there's just one truck coming. But seriously, one thing I wanted to ask you actually in return, because we have two ways of flexibility here. One was the reduction in the power output, which I can fully relate to. The other one is to actually move from 60 kilometer distance to 100 kilometer distance, which I see way more critical. Also assuming, well, maybe one pool might not work, and then you actually have 200 kilometer distance. How does that work for the operation of the long haul transport? Can you live with 100 kilometer distance in less frequented roads, or is the 60 kilometers really a problem?
I think we can at least start with that differentiation between 60 and 100 for parts of the network where we have no traffic density. So setting that bar, because the ranges that we will have on the trucks, I mean, there are already 44-ton, 300-kilometer range. And for the first part of we will not see the sort of Palermo to Stockholm long haul trucks. We will see in the beginning regional, interregional trucks. And I think at that part of the network we can live with 100 kilometers. And then the market, I mean, this is a minimum, setting the minimum level. And then the market, if needed, the market will add an extra station in between if necessary. But to me, I would like to keep the 60 kilometers, but to me, in the sort of negotiating play, I would rather, if 100 kilometers is a sacrifice I must make in order to keep the timeline of 2025 and the overall ambition, I will take that. Not risking to pushing the timeline or not risking to pushing the overall ambition level. So that's mine. For parts of that, for the network with really low traffic density.
I'd like to maybe bring in the operator perspective on this, because you're the guys that have to send packages from Palermo to Stockholm or from wherever to wherever. So what compromise would you be willing to make?
have the problem to understand 60 or 100. So there are trucks which run 1,500 until they are refueled. So this is at the moment the limit for the long hauling truck. This is what is existing. But nevertheless, I mean, when we talk about the 1,000 kilowatt-hour truck, which is then driving probably 600, 700 kilometers fully electric, you have then less payload on that. So it's always somehow a sensitivity analysis, but you can drive 600 kilometers without stopping or recharging. But if you have a truck that is driving, let's say 300 to 400 and stopping after 4 hours, what the drivers need to do anyway, so you can recharge it, but we have more load on the truck. So it's a matter of what you want to have at the end. And I also want to point out that I mean, there are a lot of, maybe I didn't mention that before, but there are a lot of fruitful discussions with OEMs at the moment. And again, mentioning Volvo, which is a great partner in that. So they are really listening, but they're also challenging us, which is also the reason why we have the 30 trucks we are running from Volvo. But this is something we need to learn, because we can't answer that at the moment. What is the right driving profile for the driver? But if we compare it on one-to-one basis with the diesel, that would never work, because diesel is running 1,500 and then it's going to be refueled after that. I don't see this with a super bigger fast charger at the moment.
All right, with that, I have quite a few more questions, but I do want to give the opportunity for the rest of the room to jump in, as we have quite a nice audience here today that probably have brought their own questions. So if anyone has one, please introduce yourself with name and who you represent, and then your question.
Starting with as a consulting, I'm working started for the university in Brussels, VUB. In a number of projects, TCO was mentioned very often. Today, to the automotive manufacturers, the question, I think comparison we hear often is 3 to 4 times more expensive than diesel, the car today. What's the evolution of that? Because energy prices, well, they're in a bad direction for the moment, so operational costs, they are rather the challenge. But is there anything on the way that we can say in 2 years that is maybe twice? Any indication of that?
Yeah, I see the indication is, of course, that truck purchase price with similar performance, if you have a sort of performance equated vehicle, will drop and since the batteries are roughly at least 50% of the product cost, you can see the rest. The price of the truck follow the battery. But I think in the beginning, and what we will see is that the battery improvements to start with will be translated into better performance. So energy density, you will still pay the same price, but you will have another 100 kilometers range. Of course, and we see that from our projects in Sweden, and when talking to customers, typically like with passenger cars, the first generation electric trucks are driven by range anxiety because there is no charging infrastructure. So they specify the truck, for a daily run more or less, and specify it with way too large batteries due to the range anxiety. The next generation, when they've started to learn how there is a charging strategy to take here as well. And we are perhaps together with some partners setting up a few places where we can charge during the day shift and when we come back. We hear that more and more. I think next generation will actually have a low spec battery. So I think that the actual sort of price will become less, because trucks will be better specified as we learn, as we go along and learn. This is something we see quite clearly. So, but then we will face in much more advanced trucks with longer ranges. But most of that will be due to the energy density of the battery, which will drive cost again. So I mean, cost per se for the batteries will not, as part of the complete truck, will not be that much lower. But overall, we have this industrialization. I mean, we are at small scale almost today. We are ramping up the entire supply chain. And the whole industry, when we start to reach volumes of tens of thousands of trucks, will of course help us to reduce costs.
So fully support these. I think maybe to complement, definitely economies of scale, summarize economies of scale we can expect performance increase and battery density to support this. Around the charging infrastructure, I will add that right now, we're only starting. So we are looking at the lowest hanging fruit, simple solutions to install. What we can expect is one, improvement on the hardware, but definitely two, massive improvements on the software as well. So smart charging, we're talking a lot about on-site generation through solar panels, for example, battery stacks as well to stock the energy on the depots. So these are the things that we can work on around the depot itself, and I would add that some testing that we've done in the very early phases now is that we make comparison between the driver that is in trains and the driver that is trained, and the performance is doubled with the driver that is trained. So I think this is one key element as well. Talking about drivers, talking about fleet managers, there's a whole learning curve that we all need to get onto, and as early as possible, because I heard something in the previous discussion where we said the more we wait, the more difficult it's going to be because supply shortage, lack of trained staff. I think if we wait, it's going to be chaotic, especially in metropolitan areas where everyone is going to sort of wake up at the same time, and there's not going to be enough solutions, supply, etc., to adopt the transition.
Okay, so Julia, you had a question.
I'm afraid it's more than a comment, the question, but allow me, because the question of grid integration and smart charging has come up quite a lot. So, short introduction, Julia Hittermeier, I work for the Regulatory Systems Project. We are a group of PM energy advisors, and I lead our e-mobility team. So I think so we're discussing two main pieces of legislation here: the CO2 standards on the one hand, working supply, and infrastructure integration on the other. And I think we need to be very careful not to basically play out one topic against the other, in the sense that we absolutely cannot afford to sacrifice ambition on the heavy-duty CO2 standards against the argument, oh, the transition is going to be expensive and difficult because of high energy costs. And I'm hearing, as we're facing an energy crisis, I'm hearing these concerns, and what we need to be aware of is that with smart charging solutions, or let's say smart grid integration of electric trucks, we can electrify the truck segment, and that's something that is going to come, that we need to do to meet climate targets at the lowest cost for the grid and for the consumers, with the highest benefits in terms of absorbing renewable energy, and saving on grid investments, and all the benefits that for the wider society that we also can see in the end of our energy bills. So yes, short term, there are higher costs of charging electric vehicles and of course charging electric trucks, but mid and long term, sensitivity analysis and different studies that we have done with ICCT on urban deliveries, that TNO have done for TNE and Agrovkesman, have shown that the TCO is still lowering even with high energy prices. Why? Because electric trucks remain the much more efficient vehicle. And second, because of economies of scale and prices coming down, which is, looping back, is why we need the CO2 targets ambition in the first place. So I just wanted to put these things into perspective to show that both are really important. Smart charging solutions are absolutely key. We can also just call it managed or optimized charging. There doesn't need to be a lot of, let's say, tech geek narratives about this. If you look at it in a very simple way, it's optimizing charging at the depot, at the or building the highway resting area, charging depot at the highway resting area where there's already grid capacity available that I can tap into, so I can invest, I can avoid investment costs for the grid companies. And Tullius is right, of course, the grid companies are, let's say, the players that we need to invite, collaborate with, invite, get into the boat, to put the truck, the prospects for truck growth, for the numbers of electric trucks on the road tomorrow, and the capacity, the charging capacity needed in AVERE and others, to put it in their network planning now, to avoid costs of scaling up and basically increase the benefits of the transition. Sorry, no questions.
No worries. Sofie, you have a...
Yeah, just to add to that, so indeed we see that there's a lot of grid capacity that we can already use today, but I would just say that if we look at grid expansion, in this room we tend to then talk about the burden that trucks would add, but these are investments that we're going to have to make for the entire economy, because all sectors are going to need additional electricity. So actually we're going to need grid enforcement, which is going to serve all different sectors. So I think it's difficult to pinpoint the costs to the truck sector because they will benefit many more sectors. I almost read that. On the previous question, I just wanted to say that I think we also need to look at different business models, because indeed we see the battery prices going down with efficiency improvements and so on. But at the same time, in our TNO study, for example, we don't see the upfront purchasing price ever reaching equality with diesel. It's always from the TCO point of view. But there, I think there are many models now, like you're also doing, where you have trucks as a service, where you overcome this burden of the initial investment barrier, and you immediately make use of the lower TCO. So I think that's something that we really have to expand, and that will be the future of electric trucking.
Now, very good, very great comments on the grid, and we are of course providing this data, our power maps, as we call it, to the grid companies, to the DSOs, and the local grid companies as an input to their planning, because and as you state, Sofie, this is not going to make or break the grid. The demands from the industry, is going net zero by 2050. So the demands from the rest of society is going to be, in terms of power and grid capacity, much more challenging than what the trucking is. So we face, the problem of the lead times, particularly when we see that now there's a need to build 5 350 kilowatt chargers in this spot, because we have a number of customers. Then there's some of the main oil companies that want to go ahead and then we have 18 months lead time. First 8 months to just get to understand whether it's possible, and then they come back and you can be connected in 18 or 24 months. And that's the problem we face on a very local level. On a higher grid level, this is not going to be a big challenge. And we see quite positive signs actually when we look at how trucks drive and how they will charge in the future. Much of the power load, the load profile, is actually beneficial to the grid. It's during night time. So we have small lunch peaks, but not that severe as we thought. I mean, there was this picture of 200 trucks pulling in, plugging in 1 megawatt chargers at 11 o'clock in the morning. That's not the case. We see that the majority of energy will come during night time, and we will have a small peak, but the peak of the grid will come during night time, not during daytime. So there are lots of good data that we can use, both on a national and on European level, in order to prepare and paved the way for this from a grid point of view.
Okay, thanks very much. So we know that we learned that the grid will hopefully cope and smart charging can contribute to this. And with that, we want to respect your time. We also have a networking reception, so to do so, I hand over to our Secretary General of the Zahnräder to close the event.
So thank you indeed. I think we have to continue discussion, and I'm kindly invited to our network possibilities. They are already on the 7th floor. Okay. So there is 2 elevators. One goes to the 7th, the other ones only go to the 6th. The last part you can do by the stairs. And yeah, I definitely hope that we can continue with the discussion among the speakers and the guests here. Many topics. So see you upstairs, and thank you for coming.